northward. This is a sweep. This isn't like a 90-degree angle we're talking about here. These borders have kind of a curvature that is being described here. And it mentions about passing around the Jebusite city. The city that before it was named Jerusalem was called Jebus. And we're going to find out that Jebusites will maintain their dignity and maintain their autonomy. Let's call it city of peace. These people, these Jebusites, are actually going to learn how to coexist with God's people. We're going to get into that a little bit later. So again, what's described here is kind of a sweeping north of the Judah border. Then the verse 9 tells us, when the border went around from the top of the hill to the fountain of water at Nephtoah and extended to the cities of Mount Ephron. The border went around to Bala, which is Kirjath Jearim. Here, the term there at the end of the verse, Bala. Think about what does that indicate? Kirjath Baal, Kirjath Jearim, but Kirjath Baal was another name for the city. It was a city of Baal, and it eventually was also given to the city of the Gibeonites, which we talked about previously in Joshua chapter 9. So Mount Moriah was a continuation of the circuit I was talking about in verse 8. And these cities that are mentioned here, kind of as the borders established, are kind of in the way, but they are included in the land. And of course, you need water. You need good sources of water. Judah's not unlike anyone else, so you see here in verse 9 that it is mentioned here that there's a fountain of water at Nephtoah. Again, this vast amounts of land. Mount Ephron mentions the cities of Mount Ephron, and Ephron's mentioned other places that talk about the tribe of Judah. Of course, a very large village at the time was around that Mount Ephron called Ephraim, and it was about 20 miles from Jerusalem. It was a little bit north of the city. So again, continuing to head toward the Mediterranean Sea as these descriptions are made. Verse 10 now. Then the border turned westward. Now we're heading toward the sea for sure, from Bala to Mount Seir, passed along to the south of Mount Jearim on the north, which is Chesalon, went down to Beth Shemesh, and passed on to Timnah. These cities here have history with other peoples. We're almost getting into the area where you're running into the Phoenicians, which would be modern-day Lebanon. You're running into many of these Canaanite people and some of their places. We're even running into the borders of the Philistines as we keep going here. And again, we're getting into villages. We're not necessarily getting into mighty cities that have been placed here, but there have been all these villages of these Canaanites that are now going to be possessed by God's people, and specifically here, Judah, the tribe of Judah. Again, Judah's getting a large amount of land. It seems to be the largest tribe as far as either prestige or population. I mean, if it's population, they need space. They have to have lands to raise crops, to raise cattle, to provide for their families. So this area that's being described is got to provide for their needs. God is not going to see them underserved. God is not going to see them being mistreated when these lands are passed out. And that's what we're seeing here. We're getting toward the end of this description here. Then we're going to get into the story we're going to tell about Caleb that I had discussed previously. So let's go to verse 10. Then the border turned westward from Bela to Mount Seir, passed along to the south of Mount Jearim on the north, down to Beth-Shemesh, passed on to Timnah. Now verse 11, and the border went out to the side of Ekron northward. Ekron was a Philistine city. Then the border went around to Shikron, passed along to Mount Bela, and extended to Jabneel, and the border ended at the sea. David, now I know why you like to skip over those a lot of times. I tell you, it's a lot. I don't mind trying to pronounce them. It's a lot of names. But you got to love the specific nature that is given by the writer here in Joshua. He doesn't want anyone to make a mistake or to misunderstand the borders of these lands. You don't want to have land disputes between your Hebrew brethren. I mean, it's the same thing as even today. If you have cousins or brothers and sisters that have disputes over property, it's not a good thing. It's a debilitating thing. And being specific here, God, inspiring the writer, is going to make sure there's no mistake and that there's no conflict as to these lands that are being discussed here. They know where they're supposed to be. They know where they're supposed to control themselves as far as their land, and there will be no questions asked. Mm-hmm. Now, you kind of wonder as they decided who got what. It's not like you could call a surveyor back in those days. I'm sure there was a lot of give and take, a lot of discussion that took place. And that's a good thing because you're learning to work within your tribe, just as we work together in the church and we develop a brotherly love for each other and seeking the best for others other than ourselves. And that's a lesson that we learn. And hopefully that's a lesson that was learned by these children of Israel, and in this case Judah, when they were trying to figure these things out and apportion these parts of land. What we're seeing here is a big overview of the limits of their land, but there's a lot of land in the middle. There's a lot of land on the coast and on the edges. Who's getting what? Who's going to get this space that might be better than the other space, and how much of it are they going to get? Those are things that had to be discussed. Those are things that had to be decided. And, you'd hope that there was not any cases of bad blood in the tribe or in the families. But of course, as we well know, a lot of times when there were disputes like that, at least not only in a tribe but in a family, who did you take it to? You took it to the elders. Almost like you take things to the elders today if there's an issue. Well, in these Hebrew times, in these Mosaic times, you still worked through a patriarchy. It wasn't patriarchal age, but you worked through a patriarchy. And, you could settle these disputes. You had wise men. You had men with experience who could make these calls and make these decisions. Now we get to the last description of the land. Verse 12. The west border was the coastline of the Great Sea, Mediterranean Sea. This is the boundary of the children of Judah, all according to their families. So, simple. They get to a point all the way to the sea. And the writer of Joshua says, well, the western border is simple. You're not going to go further than the Mediterranean Sea. And So that this border reached from Jabneel to the river of Egypt, which is the southern border. So they had a good amount of coast. If they wanted to fish in the Mediterranean Sea, maybe they had access to it there. Maybe families wanted to be fishermen. Well, that was a good place to locate. And it really depended on how they wanted to survive, how they wanted to make their way. So the boundaries are set. And now we kind of shift our gears here. These final few moments we have in class this morning. And we're going to go back to our good friend, at faithful man, Caleb. And he has some things to deal with here, with his family as well. Now, verse 13 says, Now to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, he gave a share among the children of Judah, according to the commandment of the Lord to Joshua, namely, Kirjath Arba, which is Hebron. We talked about Kirjath Arba or Hebron last week. That was the town and the region that Caleb wished to inhabit. And it says here that Joshua gave it to him. We know who really gave it to him. God gave it to him. But Joshua remembered. Of course, it wasn't just Joshua. Who was the person who first made the promise? It was Moses. It goes all the way back to Moses, who now has been gone now 7, 8, 9 years. But all these things are remembered. This promise to Caleb. And so Caleb's going to have this area that's part of this grant of land to Judah. And again, it goes back to Deuteronomy. For as he declared, this was declared from God to Moses. It is remembered by Moses. Moses verbalizes it to Joshua. And Joshua was given the same orders as God gave to Moses. And no doubt Joshua would have been reminded by God if he had even forgotten the promise that was made. So this is space that we read about last week. This was Caleb's inheritance. This was his grant. And although Caleb wasn't of Judah, he wanted to live in this land where Judah is going to inhabit. And this area is called Hebron, of course. We know previously Kirjath Arba. Verse 14, Caleb drove out the 3 sons of Anak from there, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the children of Anak. So some think this may have taken place after Joshua's death, that this was and kind of showing how far after maybe Joshua's life that the book of Joshua was written, that or some other person may have inserted this, who was divinely inspired. But this is all part of Caleb being faithful and believing that he was going to get what he was promised. We talked about these people last week. Who are these Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai? These are the giants that we talked about last week. These are the Anakim. It says they're the children of Anak. These are the very same giants that Caleb saw at Hebron when he spied. That's seen in Numbers 13:22. And of course, Caleb apparently, maybe after Joshua's death, with the help of his tribe, expels these children of Anak. Not only did he expel them and take his land, but he conquered and slew these giants, we're told. It's actually mentioned in Judges chapter 1, verse 10, the fact that this took place. And these men that were read about were probably chiefs of the Anakim. They were probably some of the bosses. And they were descendants of Anak, the original giant. But Caleb took them down. God empowered him and his family to take this land that he sought. Verse 15, then he went up from there to the inhabitants of Debir. Formerly the name of Debir was Kirjath Sepher. I'm going to go ahead and read in 16. And Caleb said, he who attacks Kirjath Sepher and takes it, to him I will give Achsah my daughter as his wife. Does this not sound like a Western? You go out there and round up that cattle for me, and I'll give you my daughter. It sounds very similar, I mean, that to what is being asked of here. He's seeking this other city, Debir. He conquered Hebron, and Caleb and his family and his supporters marched to Debir, which is near Hebron. And this probably was really land that he was due, because when he asked for Hebron, he really, I don't think, was asking for a city in particular. He was asking for a region, because this was going to be a space not just for him, but for his family, for his descendants. And so he's taking this region. Debir is in this region. And says that the name of Debir before was Kirjath Sepher. They say that this was a place of learning, a place of books. There was an academy there. There was a library at this place. It was a city where things were archived, just like a library. Public records of the Canaanites were kept here. So now he's seeking some help. So he puts the word out throughout the children of Israel. This word that we read about here in verse 16. Now, he ordered this to be proclaimed through the army even of the children of Israel. Apparently he had a portion, or Joshua had given him a portion of the army to help him do his fighting. And this was done not necessarily that the place was difficult to take, although it had fortifications and had also seen battle in the past. And even among the Canaanites, the history says that this was a place that was often conquered and reconquered and lost. Now it's Caleb's turn to take it. And he's really inspired here when he says, the man who is going to take this, well, you could be my son-in-law. His brother Othniel, who was to be a judge in Israel, would be a great man, and he's involved in this as well. And he had made a similar declaration in Chronicles. He says, to him I'll give Ashish my daughter to wife, and to be married into the family of the chief prince of the tribe of Judah was a very great honor, as well as no doubt a very large dowry might be expected, and was given with her. So this is not the first time in the Bible that we see this done. Verse 17. So Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, took it, and he gave him Achsah is his daughter, as his wife. So Othniel is the conqueror, which back then wasn't unusual, especially depending on the family you were in. So Othniel does the job. Later, again, a judge of Israel. And Caleb had been a brave man, so it was likely that his brother would be as well. So this Othniel, also some scholars think maybe he was Caleb's brother's son. In fact, they think it's most likely. So Othniel won the battle. Caleb keeps his word. Debir is taken. And Othniel is betrothed to Achsah as his wife. So Othniel's got a wife. Caleb's got his land. He's got these two cities he has sought to take. And at this point, it seems like people are pretty happy. Now, we look at verse 18. Now, it was so when she came to him that she persuaded him to ask her father for a field. Aha. Othniel, why don't you go to daddy and ask for some land? So she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you wish? In verse 19, she answered, give me a blessing. Since you've given me land in the south, give me also springs of water. So he gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Now that is a loving father. He could not do enough for his daughter here. Some people might think, well, she's got a husband now. There was probably a dowry involved. She wanted more. Or was this part of her dowry in any way? And maybe Caleb said, well, what would you wish that I give you? And it's this land with water. Had to have water, of course. She's not stupid, and so her father, her loving father, takes care of her. We'll talk a little bit more about that next Lord's Day, and then we'll, like I said, we're going to skip over a lot of the rest of the chapter, and then we'll get into the 16th chapter. Thanks a lot. Oh, okay. Okay, well then we'll put it off for 2 weeks then.